thank you. So I saw in the flyer that against my name it said experimenting entrepreneur, which is basically code speak for an entrepreneur who still hasn't figured out how to make money, and that's definitely me. So thanks for taking the time. As Bala mentioned, I run mygola.com. It's a travel planning startup, one amongst hundreds of thousands of apparently other travel startups out there. But I think we're doing something interesting that I want to talk about today. So the first thing was I really want to understand how many of you here would consider yourself to be in the technology field? Okay, great. I think the reason I put up this slide is because I want to make a point, which is that you guys are privileged unlike any other time in history. So before I jump to the next one, the reason why Mr. Stephen Hawking, a famous astrophysicist, is here is because when he was about to publish A Brief History of Time, his very popular science book on astrophysics, he was told by his publisher that for every graph, every equation that he put in his book, his readership would go by half. So despite that admonishment, this is the graph that I want to show you. So what's really happening here is that this is a graph which actually got pulled from Google Books. Google Books, as you know, has indexed tons and tons of books, and this is data from the 15th century onwards. And my contention to you is that for the first 10,000 years of human history, we were obsessed with the idea of religion, of God. And as you can see, since the 15th century, God hasn't really made a big impression on us, the blue line right there. However, sometime around the 15th century, the public imagination was caught on fire by the voyages of Magellan, of Columbus, of lands still undiscovered, of El Dorado, and so on. And you'll actually see words like land, explore, sail, ship, etc. suddenly shoot up in prominence during those 2 centuries. Around the 18th century and later period, when the Industrial Revolution started hitting, at that time science was suddenly the big thing, and you can see it in every popular culture that you've actually come across, including Sherlock Holmes from that time. And finally, something happened around the 1950s when technology as a word started shooting up in prominence in every single text that you encounter. And there's a reason for that. The reason is that we are in an unprecedented time where, whether you like it or not, all the people who did not put up their hands in, when I said, are you in the field of technology, whether you like it or not, you are. You are going to be impacted by it. You're going to be helped by it. Sometimes you're going to be roadkill because of technology. So I hope that's not the case, but we're all here to understand what that means. And of course, it exercises a particularly strong take on our imagination, as you can see from popular culture. We think of technology as them. I hope you recognize who this is. We sometimes think of technology as us, amongst us, living amongst us. We sometimes think of technology as something that aids us, makes our bodies stronger, and sometimes think of technology as something that actually makes our minds see stuff that was just not possible before. And so much so that technology has gotten to the point where it has started affecting the one thing that I never thought in my wildest imagination would ever be changed. It was immutable, unchangeable, and that is Indian politics. So look at Anna Hazare, look at the number of followers he has on his fan page. And there's something afoot here. This is not just a joke. And I actually worked with the politician for many months during one of my crazy days, and ended up starting a non-profit where I ended up working with about 15 MPs from India. And lots of stories there, maybe for another talk some other time. So my particular interest, the area that I focus on, is not how humans are interacting with technology, as to how technology is affecting the way humans interact with each other. And I'm actually more focused not on how people break up using the internet. I'm actually more focused on how specialized knowledge industries are getting affected by what's happening in technology. And the ones that I actually pay very close attention to are, of course, travel, but also things like real estate, things like financial advice, things like even medicine and education. And I think there's something very interesting and peculiar happening there that I want to bring to your attention today. So this is a loop that is playing out over and over again in each of these fields. And maybe I'll just take an example or two to tell you what's afoot. So what happens is that each of these specialized knowledge bases have gatekeepers. They've always had gatekeepers. the travel agent of the yesteryear, the stockbroker of the yesteryears, and so on. But at some point in time, the information becomes electronic. Electronic necessarily does not mean accessible. It just means electronic. At some point in time, however, something gives away, and this information becomes online and accessible. And then there is something, basically a Cambrian explosion of content that floods the entire industry. This content, some of it has actually never been seen before, and then there's this loop where tools are being created to get hold of these content, to get on top of this content, and these tools themselves in turn actually create more content, and on and on and on. So let me just illustrate with one example or two examples here. So one is actually in education itself, where we've always had, in a way, this hierarchy where education is kind of, what we get taught is actually researched up in journals and published in Natures and Sciences of the world. And some of these got electronic sometime around the 70s. Then sometime around the 90s, things like the archive came along, ARXIV, I don't know if you've run across them, but basically places where people could publish their papers without having to go through this whole peer review process, and therefore this very gatekeeper-led process. That led to a tremendous explosion sometime around the late 1990s and early 2000s, where MIT put up its open courseware out there. Stanford put tons of its content out there, and to the point where people started using that content and creating curated channels around them. Here we are today in the 2011s and 2012s, where companies like teachstreet.com abound, where you can go take any of this content and actually start teaching it to people. There's Khan Academy that I'll refer to later again, and Teach Street in turn got the guitarists amongst us to come out and say, hey, I can teach a lesson, I can teach a chord or two, and that in turn drove the whole cycle of explosion of content and tools all over again. Something similar happened in travel, where you had the ticketing exchanges actually go electronic in the 70s. Then Expedia came along and Travelocity came along in the late 90s, and we all had the power to do ticketing ourselves. And from there on, the amount of content in terms of reviews exploded, and now there are all these tools trying to make sense of these thousands of reviews for every single hotel out there. So to me, this is really interesting for a couple of reasons. One is that it means that our old gatekeepers, our friendly neighborhood stockbroker, our friendly neighborhood travel agent, is kind of gone. And I'll tell you why you'll miss them very soon. But the other thing that's happening is that there is this new kind of content that hasn't really been understood or harnessed before that is now in front of us, and something that is actually causing a lot of grief. If you look at customer surveys in any of these industries, they went up and up and up as more and more power came to the customer, until the point where the paradox of choices started playing out, where a lot of these customers are finally going up in arms and saying, too overwhelming, why can't I have my old stockbroker back? Or why can't I have my old travel agents back? Now the travel agent, of course, has in the meantime either gone extinct or gone upstream, where either the technophobes reside who do not want to use this technology, or there are niches where there is very specific content catering to people who can actually afford to have someone do one-on-one personalization to them. And what I'm saying is that that's going to change. We all need our own personal travel planners. We all need our own personal financial advisors. And in a way, what we do at MyGola is trying to help solve that problem in a very specific vertical. So let me explain to you briefly what we do at MyGola. I think it'll help everything else that come along. So we're a travel planning startup. The idea is that instead of you spending many, many hours trying to do all the research for your trip, and imagine you're planning a trip to Istanbul, instead of you getting a PhD in doing a trip to Istanbul, and then you, and then you, and then you, we do it once, and then we somehow get it out to all of you. So when you come to MyGola, you ask a question about anything that you like, whether it's flights, hotels, the usual stuff, but also things like what kind of a SIM card will work in Istanbul, or should I take a stroller from India, or can I actually rent one in Istanbul, things like that. And what happens next is very interesting. You actually have someone who's actually not a MyGola employee. It's actually a travel enthusiast who actually picks up that question, uses tools that we have created, that we've worked really hard on, and comes back with an answer very, very quickly. And this is the person who's your travel agent, your travel planner, all through your entire trip. So with that understanding of what we do, let me get to what's really interesting in this space right now. So first of all, whenever I talk about this, I keep hearing, well, of course, the answer is Watson. Actually, it's elementary, but it's not Watson. I think the answer to all this content explosion is us, people like you and I, who have a passion for travel, who have a passion for tracking stocks, for example. And this is what I'm going to talk about now. So first, let me just step on my soapbox and give you some theory, as my theory. So you won't see it in any peer-reviewed journal, but I think this is what's happening, which is that for all of these complex information types, we are looking at systems that have 3 properties. And these 3 properties are really, really important. However, our current computing systems and foreseeable computing systems fall very short of delivering them for us. So bear with me. The first one is understand intent. And for you guys at Yahoo, obviously, this is something that you would be very close to, and you get a sense of this. Basically, imagine things like when you walk into a doctor's office and you're a terminally sick patient. I don't wish that upon any of you, but imagine you were. The doctor has to figure out what your intent is when you say you want to be cured or you want to be cared for. The doctor has to figure out, are you saying that you want to try out the latest cancer therapy on your already chemotherapy-racked bodies? Or are you saying, give me palliative therapy so that I can die in peace amongst my loved ones? That's a judgment call. In our case, in travel, much more prosaic kind of a situation, but similar complexity, which is you're planning a trip to Amsterdam, and you come in and say, hey, planning a trip to Amsterdam. By the way, I've been to Amsterdam many times. And by the way, my wife is also coming along who hasn't been to Amsterdam. And by the way, I hate museums. And by the way, my wife loves shopping. So the web obviously stops at the first point and says, oh, you're going to Amsterdam. I don't care that you're 80-year-old or you're a 15-year-old on a spring break. Here's what you should do in Amsterdam. So what happens as a result? We basically become schizophrenic. We say, well, let's put on first our hat of having been to Amsterdam many, many times before. So you go and search. Then we say, okay, fine. Now let's put on our hat of being in Amsterdam for the very first time for my wife's sake. Now let's put on the hat of actually loving shopping. And now let's put on the hat of actually hating museums. And here you are basically doing back and forth on the computer. You have a spreadsheet open in front of you. And basically the entire experience feels like you're planning your taxes. You're not planning a trip. So understanding intent is really, really important. At MyGola, a solution that is very simple, which is that you actually let the guy speak. Instead of having him to fill out a form, why can't he speak in the phone, or why can't he actually type it out exactly the way he likes it? I can talk more about that, but let me jump to the next one, which is collapse choices. Now, this is a function that we've always expected these systems to do, which is there are n number of choices out there. How can I boil it down to the 2 or 3 that cognitively a human brain is supposed to understand? Now, our problem is that you're planning a trip to Amsterdam. There are 1,600 cafes there. You might actually look for the ones that are kid-friendly, and or you're actually planning a trip to Chicago, and you want to find a place to stay. So let me tell you how complex this problem can get. So bear with me for this graph, but I'll actually quickly walk you through it. In the middle is the big kahuna in travel, TripAdvisor. And if you're planning a trip to Chicago, then every hotel worth its name will have hundreds of reviews in TripAdvisor. But it gets worse than that. So there's Oyster, which will actually send professionals to every single one of those hotels and finds out what actually is the real picture for each of these hotels. There's TV Trip. That will give you videos of every single hotel room. There's Room 77. That will say, hey, by the way, when you walk up to the desk, the check-in clerk, ask for room 107, not 109, because it has a better view, it has a bigger jacuzzi, or whatever. There's Airbnb. That'll tell you don't even stay in a hotel room. Actually sublet an apartment from someone else. There is Jet Setter, which will say, no, wait a second. You can stay in a nice hotel room. Just that we'll drive up an auction just for you, and you'll be able to stay in a $500 room per night kind of a hotel at only $200. There's Twitter, where every single hotel worth its salt throws out deals every week or so to all its followers. And then there's Foursquare, where people like you and I are checking in and saying, hey, make sure that you talk to John the barman and ask him for the island tequila. So all of this data is only for one single hotel that you're supposed to choose from. What we've done at MyGola is try to boil all of them together into one single place. Yet, at the end of it, the problem is not solved. From maybe 1,600 hotels in Chicago, we can boil it down to 10, but 10 is still too many. And that's where the human judgment comes in. We have these guides whose job is to look at those 10, look at the pictures and say, this looks like a sunny apartment. This looks like something which somebody who's this has a kitchenette. So because you're traveling with kids, therefore a kitchenette might be super important for you. Something which is sunny might be super important for you. And that's the judgment, the human judgment call that they make. And to me, that's really, really important to actually solve that last mile using human judgment. The third is personalized delivery, and I think this is something which gets short shrift. Basically, the fact that every time you are interacting with these systems, it's not just you versus the algorithm. It's somebody who understands your peculiar needs. And I'll actually illustrate this not with an example in travel, but actually in education. So I mentioned Khan Academy. Most of us know Khan Academy for the awesome video content that they've created. And you can take calculus classes, et cetera, on Khan Academy. But what's more interesting is the software at the back that powers the classroom experience in Khan Academy. And I would not turn on the video just because of time. But basically what happens is that you can walk in as a teacher and every single day look at the performance of every single student in your class on a dashboard. You can see of all the concepts in calculus, which is the one concept that is actually troubling most of your students. And then you can actually focus only on that concept. In fact, you can go one step further, and you can find the two students who are struggling with, say, differential calculus, and pick them apart, and then provide coaching to them. Now imagine what this teacher is doing. This teacher is not teaching. This teacher is playing the role of a mentor. This teacher is playing the role of a tutor whose job is not to communicate this specialized knowledge to you, but to first and foremost identify you who's having trouble. So this is the crux of what we are doing. We're saying there's something very interesting afoot, which is we are completely changing the definition of what each of these professions are like and are going to be like in the future. So this, by the way, this is not Salman Khan. This is actually Salman Khan, but not the Salman Khan. And for any of you who are not familiar with his work, I'd say just go out today, do me a favor, and get inspired. So this is my theory of what's happening, which is we have all of these professions, the doctor, the teacher, the travel agent, the real estate agent, the stockbroker, et cetera, and we have 20% of the people who really understand the core concepts behind what they're doing. They are amazing at creating content. They're amazing at creating the tools in each of these professions, and yet we force them to go out and teach. Yet we tell them to do all this human empathy stuff that they're frankly not that comfortable with. So my theory is this: how about we actually get to a point in our worlds where for these 20% of the people focus only on content creation and tools. They are the Salman Khans of the world who create this great algebra course. And the internet and all the distribution channels allows that great content to be distributed out to millions of people. What happens to the remaining 80%? The remaining 80% of us who are people like me, who are mediocre, who are kind of struggling along, chugging along. And I would say that those 80% are going to be substituted by people like you and I. So you and I, who have a thing for travel, will become a travel agent for a day just because we love researching Istanbul. And the tools are there. And we have the human empathy. We understand. It comes intrinsically to us that I would want to explore Istanbul in such a manner. Now, we have, for example, guides all over the country. We have 1,000 guides all over the world, and primarily in India. There are guys, there's a guy sitting in Jalpaiguri called Ashok, who's regularly planning backpacker trips to Costa Rica. And trust me, he's never been to Costa Rica. We make sure that he has all the data he needs about Costa Rica, but he's passionate about backpacking. And so he uses those tools to actually deliver that last mile. Similarly, you and I've talked to lots of people who keep talking about how they would love to teach. And of course, without a BEd or a master's in education, you are just not going to be allowed in front of children or in front of anyone else who needs to be taught. But why is that the case? What if you and I actually form that 80% one of our days, 2 of our days of every single week? So what happens to the ones who are actually at 80% right now, who are doing mediocre jobs? I would say that this is the time when they can stop being mediocre accountants, mediocre travel agents, and become the virtuoso pianist, or the amazing nurse, or the fantastic algebra teacher that they've always wanted to do. So that's something which I hope will happen in the future, and something that I really look forward to. Hopefully my gallows will step in that direction, and hopefully this will inspire some of you to go out and actually think along those lines. Thank you for your time.